Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Jay Hinman. I'm the VP of Marketing at Neumob, and today we're going to be looking at mobile app user experience myths, and then we're going to debunk them. Our goal today is to provide you with new ways to look at common mobile app user experience myths and to give you some tools and ideas to take forward and back to your businesses. So we have three great, very short presentations today from Mixpanel, Apteligent, and Neumob, so why don't we get started? So when it comes to mobile app user experience, there's often a little too much folk wisdom that's masquerading as truth within our industry. For example, it's often thought that all an app product owner needs to do to figure out what a user wants in an app is just to A/B test everything, like the colors of the buttons and every bit of headline copy and so on, and that will magically reveal the secrets to higher revenues. Or that fixing crashes in your apps will make sure that users won't have problems with crashes ever again. And we even sometimes marvel at how fast mobile networks are in our own backyard, so much so that we don't even need to worry about an app's speed and load times any longer. Well, we're here to debunk these and other bits of mobile app user experience conventional wisdom. So in that service, today you're going to hear from Justin McGon from Mixpanel. He's content marketing manager there, and he's going to start off and he's going to tell us why most A/B tests fail. And next, we're going to hear from Andrew Levy, Apteligent's founder and CSO. He will be presenting on what data science can teach you about app performance and user experience. And finally, I'm going to present on mobile networks and some of the ways that they can torpedo and undermine your mobile app and your app's retention. A reminder that we're looking to go about 45 minutes today, give or take, in total, and that you'll have time at the end to ask questions. And you can type those questions in your GoToWebinar software's questions box. It's at the lower, kind of the very bottom of the tool there. So just make sure to let us know whom you're addressing that question to. Is it to Mixpanel, Apteligent, or to Neumob, or is it just to all three of us and anyone can take it? Thanks, and so let's get started, and I'm going to turn it over now to Justin from Mixpanel.
Great.
Let me just switch over to you. There we go.
All right, everyone can see my screen. Screen. Cool, here we go. All right, so the portion I'm going to talk about is A/B testing. I'm Justin from Mixpanel. I've been here for a couple years, working in tech for a handful of years. Previously worked on the data team with the Obama campaign. I like to answer questions with numbers. And so you would think that I would love A/B testing. Everyone loves A/B testing, right? A/B testing is the answer to all of product's problems. You can just A/B test and optimize your way to a great user experience and great product success. Even if you haven't done it yourself, you've read the blog post, right? You know, everyone has their blog post about how they did this and they got a 38% increase in conversions. And I think that's how most people feel about A/B testing until they actually run an A/B test. And then they realize the sad reality that that's just not true. It's very hard to optimize your way to success, and it's certainly not easy. There's no quick, easy fixes, and the hardest reality is that most A/B tests fail. They fail, and when I say fail, I don't mean that your variant doesn't beat your original. I mean that they get inconclusive results. You still learn something if you run a test and the variant underperforms the original, and that's meaningful. The waste of effort, the A/B tests that I hate are the ones that are inconclusive, the ones that you can't justify taking any action off of. And we don't talk about those enough because no one wants to write a blog post about an experiment that doesn't work. So we don't talk about those 7 out of 8 tests that don't fail. The problem with that is that it creates a confirmation bias where the only time we're talking about A/B tests, we're talking about successful A/B tests. And it creates this myth that A/B tests are just the answer to all of life's problems, and that it becomes this solution of, well, we don't need a good answer, we'll just A/B test a lot of answers. And that's how we set ourselves up to fail. So to start off, I'm just going to do a really quick stats 101 to say, what do I mean when I say significant? What does statistical significance mean? Well, if something's significant, it means that the results of your experiment are not merely a product of chance. So what does that mean? It's actually really straightforward if you think about it in a concept that you're familiar with dealing with. So let's say we have two experiments here. We're flipping two coins. Um, okay, so I flip the first coin. It lands on heads 6 times. It lands on tails 4 times. Cool. Um, then second experiment, second coin, I flip coin B 100 times, and it lands on heads 60 times and tails 40 times. You don't need to run any math to understand the difference between these two experiments. In both of them, the coin lands on heads 60% of the time. But inherently, we all understand that the results of the first experiment are insignificant. If you flip a coin 10 times and it lands on heads 6, tails 4, even though it's not exactly 50-50, these are results that you would expect to see when you flip a fair coin 10 times. The difference between heads and tails is just noise. It's meaningless. We wouldn't take any action off of this result. In our second experiment, again, it lands on heads 60% of the time, but because of the larger sample size, the difference, which is the same ratio to the first experiment, is more meaningful. And these results are more significant, and it's obvious to us that coin B is not a fair coin. So in this example, everyone understands significance. This makes sense to us. Cool. But this is not how we run A/B tests. This is how we run A/B tests. So we have experiment A and experiment B. Let's just say that it's fields for your app. You're trying to get people to do something, and experiment, they both get 1,000 views. So you send 2,000 people through. Each one gets 1,000. The first one has 79 completions, so easy math, 7.9% conversion rate. Second one has 95 completions, 9.5% conversion rate. Is this significant? That is not as obvious. And that's why we have to look at statistical significance, which most A/B testing, I think just about every A/B testing solution will give you, but people don't look at it. And so they just look at these numbers. It's very easy to report back to your boss or to whoever and say like, oh yeah, we increased by switching to experiment by this new variant that we came up and ran in experiment B, that we can improve conversion rate by 1.6%. That's not true. This is not statistically significant. This is 90%, which is very much inconclusive. That means that it's reasonable that the difference between the results, the 79 and the 95, it's reasonable that that's just noise, that that's just a product of chance, the same way that flipping a coin 10 times gives us 6 and 4 and we have that differential, but we know it's just chance. And so if you take action off of this and start making changes and doing all these different things, it feels like progress. One of the most dangerous things are things that feel like progress and aren't, and this is one of those things. And you can just waste your time doing this. People get caught up in cycles of doing tiny optimizations of like, well, we did this and we got a 1% conversion here and a 2% conversion here and a 1.7% conversion increase here. And then they implement all these things into their final product. And then in the total user experience, the overall conversion doesn't change. Those numbers don't follow through. And that's because they were just like chasing after noise. Okay, so that's kind of like the cold dose of reality. Those are the 7 out of 8 A/B tests that no one speaks of, the ones that like are inconclusive and what that means. That being said, like I actually really love A/B tests. I just love well-run, well-conducted A/B tests. And I think that we need to spend more time running more meaningful ones so that you get that 1 out of 8. And that takes work. It's not easy. But if you put in the time to conduct a good experiment, you're going to get more meaningful results. So one of the first things that you can do, this is super easy. I shouldn't even have to say it, but just don't end your test too soon. It seems super obvious, but it needs to be said because people mess this up all of the time. They see a differential and they see the second one's better, and then they just say, okay, done. So I'm going to look at the same exact form experiment, and we're going to look at like 2 possible outcomes of keeping it running. So here's the first one. the results were insignificant before. We send another 1,000 people through each variant, and the ratio holds exactly the same. The conversion rates hold exactly the same. However, now we have a 97% significance. Typically, you want to hit like 95 or something to be statistically significant. And so now we're like, okay, this is meaningful. It doesn't mean that the numbers are exactly right, but like there's a overwhelmingly we think that variant B will outperform variant A. We've run it long enough. Okay, that's a very easy way to reach statistical significance. Just don't enter tests early. But often, let's say we keep it running, and this is our results. Another 1,000 people go through. The numbers kind of start to converge. They're still insignificant, and we could continue running this, and maybe eventually we'd have enough results that the differential of like less than 1% would be statistically significant, and we could say that variant B improves the experience by 0.8% or 0.9 or whatever it shakes out to be. But there's also a fairly decent chance that we continue running this test and it just never reaches statistical significance, because these two things, one just doesn't outperform the other, and any difference in the numbers is just noise. A really great way to understand this is to run an A/B test where you have the same exact thing in your original and your variant, and just see how the numbers are different. And because it's the same exact thing, that any difference between the two is noise, and that will really give you an appreciation for how much noise there is in numbers and why we need to rely on statistical significance. Okay, so how can we avoid this? A lot of these failures it's failure by design. When it comes to these experiments, you're never going to get to a point where you're running A/B tests and every single one of them is a success. You're getting meaningful. All of us, marketers, product people, engineers, we all conduct poor experiments, but we need to conduct fewer poor experiments, and we need to not be shocked when we run meaningless tests and get meaningless results. If you run a bad experiment, it's unavoidable. You're going to get bad results. The biggest problem is that we just don't run enough meaningful experiments, and for that, I blame this. This is how most people learn about A/B testing. It's the button test, basically. Like when you're first learning about A/B testing, this is the example that they give. We're going to send someone to the site. They'll see button 1, which is blue, or button 2, which is red. And then we'll see which button gets the most people to add to cart or whatever the conversion event is. This is a fine way to explain the concept of A/B testing, and so I understand why we use this. It's very concise, it's very simple, it's easy to see the variation between it, but this is a really bad A/B test because it's testing something that's pretty much meaningless. Unless you're Amazon, you're not getting enough people to determine like what shade of blue button is the right button, it's the wrong button. There are some tests out there. Someone will send me a blog post of people who ran this test, and this button works and this button doesn't work, and like this color worked and this one didn't. But usually it's because they just messed up something at the very beginning, where they you don't need the A/B test to know that a gray button will disappear on a black background and an orange button will pop in that black background. So just to wrap up, I wanted to, I could talk about A/B testing forever, but I wanted to talk about a good example of an A/B test. This is from an article that I did. It's on the Signal. You can read it. We're basically just it's an example of an A/B test that I liked. This is my friend Hari. He's the co-founder of a company called Jobber. It's basically just a Tinder-like swiping app for matching up job seekers with people who have open positions. And what they did is they tested something meaningful. They didn't test button color. They didn't test like small changes. They built different onboarding flow for their apps. Many different versions of it, actually. They had a whiteboard up in their office that had 9 different variations of their onboarding. And that meant that they were going through and putting a significant amount of people through each version of that. And at the end of that, it took a lot of work. They had to build these different onboarding flows. It wasn't a simple change. It wasn't a simple just change this button, just change this text. But they were able to get meaningful results and actually get something good out of that. And so, like, if you want to run a good A/B test, you have to conduct a good experiment. And conducting a good experiment means creating actual differentiation, putting time into creating different user experiences so that when you put people through it, you're going to get meaningful results out of it. If you just make tiny changes that don't really impact the user's behavior, you shouldn't be surprised when you don't see significant results out of it. So I have a whole blog post and many blog posts about A/B testing and similar things. If you want to see more about this, you can just Google Mixpanel A/B testing, check out our blog, The Signal, go on mixpanel.com. You can create an account and start tracking user engagement analytics today and start running some meaningful A/B tests. If you do, let me know about them. Send me an email. I'm always down to talk about it. I love talking about A/B tests, even if I sometimes am not the biggest fan of every single A/B test. So I think I've run through my allotted time. Again, if you want to talk more about it, send in a question, send me an email. Right now I'm going to hand it off to Andrew, who is going to talk a bit about crash analytics, which he also thinks are pretty meaningful, but has a few myths that he would like to bust when it comes to those.
All right, thank you. As Justin mentioned, there's a few myths here that we're going to go through around performance and user experience. We're only going to spend a few minutes on each of these, but if you have further questions, you can reach out to me. I encourage you to go to data.apteligent.com. You'll see some of the graphs and benchmarks that I'll be referencing, specifically the research section there for some more technical data or details on this. So the first myth is that crash is all you need, and I'm actually, when you look at all the ways that a user can have a poor experience with an app, there's hundreds of millions, if not billions, of permutations of various performance problems that they could run into. There could be problems with the network, just overall slow performance, maybe due to the device or the OS. There could be UI problems. There's a whole host of issues that can negatively impact the user. But let's imagine for a second that you don't buy this and you still just care about crashes. Well, let's dive into what's actually causing those errors. And what our data science team discovered was that actually a large percentage of those crashes were being caused by network issues. So let me give you a specific example. You can imagine a shopping app and you're attempting to check out where the user they attempted to grab some inventory. Maybe they were searching through some products. It looks like in this example, we see it's taking over 3 seconds to load. The connection state changed from edge to Wi-Fi. The internet went down. They attempted to check out, and then the application crashed. So you can very clearly see what actually happened in this scenario. And the crash was a result of the internet connectivity here and attempting to communicate with a cloud service or a network endpoint when there was no connection, right? So our data scientists found that something about 20% of the time a network issue was correlated with a crash. The interesting part about this was that they found that actually 88% of the time that communication was successful, which is, seems counterintuitive. But what it essentially means is that mobile developers are handling kind of the trivial cases, if you want to call them that, when there's an error returned. But what we actually wanted to dig in further was find out, well, why, so they're successful, but what's actually happening? This data looks a little intimidating, but essentially what we found was that the calls were taking shorter time than average, but the speed and the speeds were also lower. And you would actually assume, if you do the math, that if the latency decreased, the speed would increase. And this actually tells us that less data was being returned. So, in other words, unexpected data was being returned when they communicated with a cloud service, and it eventually led to a crash. So that's the takeaway here. And the point of all this, if I go back to my original point, is that there's a lot of factors that can influence an application failing and influence a poor user experience. Performance issues can be related to one another and eventually lead to a failure. And you need visibility and insights like this to be able to really dive into figuring out what is actually happening in your application. So that was myth number one. Myth number two is that release planning happens only once. Now, when I say release planning, I mean, figuring out everything that needs to get done, that checklist before release goes out to the App Store. The mobile industry is moving very quickly, and you may put together a release plan, and suddenly the market changes under you, and you're not prepared to deal with the consequences of putting out an application that didn't account for those changes. So some of the things that you need to keep in mind are, well, how do you currently compare to your competitors? How do your relevant KPIs and performance benchmarks compare within the category of the App Store that you're going to launch this application? What are currently, and I put currently in italics here, the most popular hardware and software configurations? As I mentioned, the mobile industry moves fast. A new device may gain popularity. A new OS update comes out. You need to ensure compatibility with those configurations. What are the bandwidth constraints? And what service provider should you choose? These things can all influence the user experience. So here's an example with a bunch of data. This is meant to be an eye chart. The point here is that there's a ton of metrics that you need to account for. This is an example of launching an Android shopping app in India. We can see that it's very fragmented. The top 20 devices here only account for 36% of the overall device usage. This is actually, that number is about 50% in the US, to give you a point of comparison there. But the point is that you have important metrics that you may not be thinking about, like how long is the application taking to load? Again, what is the bandwidth available in that region that I'm launching? It may work great in your labs in the office, but you suddenly launch to a remote region. That's something that you need to account for here. I mentioned that the ecosystem is moving quickly. Well, you have new flagship device launches occurring all the time. We have the new Galaxy S8 launching shortly. Every year we have a batch of new iPhones, new Pixel devices will be launching. The point is that you need to understand what is the adoption of these devices, what operating system launches are coming out of the woodwork, what is the overall penetration rate, so that you can understand, do we need to ensure that we're compatible with those or not? And then finally, I mentioned comparing yourself to your competition. You need to understand which areas that your team should invest in. There's a lot of noise, or a lot of data, I should say, being generated from mobile applications. You need to know which issues are those that should be prioritized. And so perhaps your crash rate is low, but your app load time is high. You need to direct your team to go and investigate what's going on there. And in that concept, or that vein of prioritizing, another myth that I'm going to discuss here is that user behavior and business insights are separate from app performance. And I say prioritizing because you really need to look at which steps of the funnel you're losing users and why you're losing those users, which could very be due to a performance issue and poor user experience. And that would obviously help prioritize where your team should invest in, if something like a checkout flow is broken versus, updating some profile information, obviously, where to invest your time. Now, we didn't just want to claim that performance and user experience is tightly coupled. We wanted to show the correlation. So here we see the results of our analysis. We actually showed that crashes can impact overall churn by up to 6x, and users are up to 8x less likely to return the next day due to crashes. Again, we're looking at just one performance metric, in this case crashes, and one business metric, in this case churn. But the point is that they're very much interrelated and impact one another. Another takeaway from the same analysis is that actually users that are more highly engaged are actually less sensitive to performance issues in the app. In other words, your brand new users or your users that only occasionally use the app are more likely to leave, for example, if there's a crash. They're more likely to churn. And that's what we see this cluster of red at the bottom of this graph showing. But as you go up the graph or up the y-axis, those are more highly engaged users that will take a little bit more pain because they love your application so much. Now, what does this mean from a dollar standpoint? Well, I think the point of a lot of what we're discussing today is that it is more expensive to acquire a new user than retain an existing user. And let's just run through a typical scenario. Let's imagine you had some issue that caused you to lose 600 customers. Well, you have to think about what is your acquisition cost. In the example here, it looks like we'll need to spend another $30,000 just to win back those 600 customers that you lost. Let's assume you have some kind of lifetime value or LTV, in this case $300. You just lost $180,000 in future revenue. And not only that, you probably had some goals to grow the amount of users in your application. Well, you need to make up for the ones you've lost, and suddenly you've tripled your acquisition costs just to reach that previous goal. The point here is using tools like Apteligent, Mixpanel, Neumob is much cheaper and a much more effective way to get a handle on that user experience, make sure that you're retaining and creating successful users. Just a quick note on where we're getting all this data. If you're not familiar with Apteligent, we look at all of the various types of performance issues and the impact on user behavior that can occur over the course of a user using a mobile application. So this includes failures in certain critical flows, network problems, crashes, just general slow performance. And what's unique is that we, again, tie this to the business results so you can know where to prioritize, where to dive in, look at global industry benchmarks and competitive data in order to make sense of all of this. So with that, feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'll turn it over to Jay, who can talk about how to fix some of these networking issues that I was actually talking about.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Andrew. And I'm just going to maximize my screen here for better viewing for everybody. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I want to definitely follow on some of the points that Andrew and Apteligent made. So I'm going to be taking a look today at the specific role that mobile networks play in undermining some of the assumptions that we make about how mobile apps actually perform in the wild and the impact that our conventional wisdom about these mobile networks has on kind of hurting our mobile app user experience and mobile app retention. Now, certainly not everyone feels that we've arrived at, some kind of nirvana in which all of the high-powered features that we throw into our apps are beautifully supported by mobile networks in every single country, from Azerbaijan to Zambia. But most often, people in charge of developing mobile apps tend to have outsized expectations for what experiences networks can actually deliver. And conventional wisdom can often be that, mobile networks are now so fast, maybe we don't need to worry about app speed. We can instead, load up our apps with heavy SDKs and tons of third-party API calls, many of which are extremely important to the app's functioning, especially how it looks and it feels and how you market to people. Or, they might be getting excited about the 5G speed for networks. It's just around the corner, right? And perhaps with the right amount of blinders on, an app owner or developer can use his or her own app performance and speeds on their own 4G and LTE networks as a nice proxy for everyone else's experience with the same app, which is really not the case, as we will discuss. Obviously, that's not the way things are actually working out. We are building full-featured SDK-loaded apps that are full of moving parts, and we tend to assume that mobile networks are keeping up with what we've built. And we tend to do a good job of measuring crashes in our apps, but we often miss the bigger picture of app load times or ads or images that don't show up, and then those frustrating in-app errors that make it hard to complete a transaction, and so on. And as mentioned, we see our apps perform well, perhaps where our senior executives or our developers live, in places like San Francisco or London or New York or Tel Aviv. But then we don't take steps to understand how similar or dissimilar that experience is in other markets around the world. So here's the true state of mobile networks around the world. OpenSignal is a company who regularly publishes a report called The Global State of Mobile Networks. And it's a judgment-free overview of measurements that they've taken that show how deeply penetrated certain mobile network technologies are. And there's a lot of good news here. Most countries now have 3G or better signal availability 75% or more of the time, even small countries in Asia and in Africa. The much faster 4G or LTE networks, they're continuing to roll out everywhere. And here are some figures that show LTE penetration in key countries. You'll see that the US now has 81%, China has 74%, Israel 58%, and Russia 49%. And these continue to grow every month. OpenSignal also reported that the world's fastest networks are in South Korea, so they're very lucky, and that all signs show that network buildouts are robust and healthy in most parts of the world. So what's the problem, right? Mainly, it's that LTE penetration is not a particularly useful corollary for app speed. It totally helps, certainly, but correlation is not causation in this case. In fact, an LTE data pipe fills very quickly with video and large images and all those billions of requests and responses that are happening all around us, especially during congested or peak hours. Neumob's customers in the travel industry have told us, and our measurements with their apps prove that their apps are slowing to an absolute crawl, like around 5:30 p.m. in train stations when everyone is buying tickets through the app, or with another app, sporting events in the UK, when people are actually hitting these gambling apps to take part in in-play betting on kind of when the next throw in or who's going to win the next corner kick or what have you. This is in the UK, which has some of the fastest networks in the world. It's also important to note that a 2-second load time that we clock in the US might be a 10-second load time in places like China or India or Russia. And it's also true that customers just get easily frustrated with apps, and they all know how to get rid of the ones that they don't like by just simply pressing and holding on their screens. So currently, only 7.5% of app installs are now sticking around as active users after 30 days, which unfortunately is another way of saying that 82.5% aren't sticking around. This is something that we've seen at Neumob in some consumer research that we've done about the connection between app performance and app retention. We've done several research projects around different app verticals. The first image on your left here shows that nearly 63% of travel app customers, and that's like airline apps, hotel, train apps, car rental, or car hire apps, they say they deleted a travel app from their smartphones due to poor performance, like slow load times and app crashes or slow in-app performance. Even a single image that doesn't successfully load can be a big problem. We recently did a study of mobile shoppers who bought products within mobile apps, and we found that 47% of users will exit the app if a product image doesn't load. That's a single product image for the whatever it is that they're shopping for. And 20% go on to buy that same product but from a different seller instead. We've also done some research around enterprise apps, also known as SaaS apps or apps for business. And over 69% of these users said that they deleted an enterprise app due to poor app performance. It's even worse for media, news, and sports apps, where there's like a lot of competition to kind of tell similar stories. And there, nearly 75% of users had deleted one of these apps due to poor performance. So the impatience runs across the board, and it's definitely something that any app product owner needs to be keeping a close watch on. One of the big drivers of user dissatisfaction is in-app errors. And to define these are things like app timeouts, or images that don't load, or links that just don't complete due to slow networks, among many other things. And they tend to average about 3 to 12%, and that rate is highly dependent on current network conditions. In the US, we tend to average about 3% network errors, but in places like India, China, and on slower networks in Eastern Europe and across Latin America, it can run as high as 12%. And we've actually seen it worse in some measurements for some of our customers. This even extends to the ads within your apps, if you happen to have ads in your apps. An important thing to note is that when an ad isn't delivered or displayed, in most cases, the publisher and the app owner don't get paid for that impression. And we found in working with apps in every corner of the world that anywhere between 2 to 40% of mobile app ad requests aren't delivered, either because the ad wasn't fast enough to be received through the mobile network and displayed to the user, or because there were in-app errors and timeouts that prevented that ad from arriving at all. This is very dependent on country and, more importantly, on mobile networks. So you'll see like an LTE or 4G network in the United States will not have the issues that a 2G or a 3G network in India does, for example. But mobile users generally don't know what sort of network they're on, or if they do, there's really not a whole lot they can do about it. Here are some rates of non-delivery that we've seen for a major entertainment app that's deployed all over the world. This was this past December, so it's just a few months old. And it shows the ad requests, the ads that weren't delivered, and the percentage that weren't delivered in this app. And note that this is an app with Neumob's mobile app acceleration turned off. So this is what really happens in the wild. And you can see some pretty big discrepancies that point to just how volatile network conditions can be. Even in the US, on Mopub's ad network, over 20% of the ads actually weren't being delivered to end users, with over 36 not arriving in China. And Millennial Media's numbers were a little bit better overall. But still, 18.72% ads were not delivered in India. So it definitely points to missed revenue opportunities and to a potentially very frustrating user experience with interstitials that hang and don't load and blank spaces where banner ads should be and so on. I mean, users don't like ads to begin with, and this just adds to the frustration. So in terms of how long it takes ads to load with the Neumob SDK turned off, here's what we see from Mopub, which is an ad network which was used by our customer as previously referenced. So the ads only took half a second to load in the US, but over 1.1 seconds in Singapore. And Turkey wasn't too bad, but India was nearly twice as bad. Sometimes these results can be surprising, and they're based on where the aggregated users actually are when the majority of requests are being made. For instance, in a strong coverage area during non-peak hours, or in a poor coverage area during peak hours. It just, the summary really is the actual lived experience of mobile app users can be wildly different around the world, even for the same app. But you're saying, oh, well, 5G is coming, 5G networks are coming, and there's really a great deal of hope and a lot of hype for what will likely be a much improved mobile experience once 5G is deployed. Though some trials are starting this year in 2017, in places like Seattle and elsewhere, we were talking very small subsets of users on technology and on technology standards that really are still being defined. The best estimates for general availability in the US are in 2021 and likely later. And the mobile-first countries like India and Russia and Brazil will lag, and they'll start really kind of fully embracing 5G in about 6 to 8 years. I mean, these are massively expensive network overhauls for mobile operators, and the rich and well-capitalized like Verizon and AT&T and Vodafone, they're likely to go first. So 5G is coming, but it will take quite a while to really make a significant impact on mobile app user experience. So in the meantime, there are simple mobile app acceleration SDKs that measure your current app performance down to the millisecond and then speed it up everywhere in the world. This is what Neumob does. And the numbers you see here are from a large tier 1 travel app who operate all over the world. With Neumob in their app and turned on, they saw gains from 30% to over 100% depending on the country. Speed is great, but what's really important is the impact that it ultimately has on actual user behavior. So our customers are averaging a 9% increase in app sessions with Neumob turned on versus with it turned off. And more sessions and a faster app really mean a lot of things. It means that if your app is transactional in nature, users have a faster time to check out and therefore less time to be distracted and to abandon their shopping cart. It means stronger app brand loyalty and an increased desire to use the app next time, which definitely was borne out by what Andrew was saying about crashes. An easier and faster path to checkout means more windows for increased page views and potentially the chance to add other things to the shopping cart or add more transactions, and of course better App Store reviews, which leads to more app downloads and higher revenues. So in conclusion, here's how to overcome conventional thinking about mobile networks in 2017. First, it's time to just get a handle on your app's load times and its in-app error rate, its speed, its crashes, and its overall performance. Not merely where your senior execs or your app developers are, but everywhere in the world. And try and understand the actual lived experience of your app users, not merely the front-end marketing metrics such as pages viewed and transactions completed, but back-end metrics like error rates and app load times as well. Then measure it, test it, fix it, and then measure it again. And Neumob can help with that. We can help accelerate your app where you're falling behind. This will help you boost sessions, boost transactions, and improve your user satisfaction. So that's all for me. And with that, we'd like to go to your questions. Remember, you can type them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar software, and just make sure to address them to Justin at Mixpanel, Andrew at Apteligent, or Jay at Neumob, or to all three of us. All right, so let me just take a quick look at what questions have been arriving while I've been talking. Let's see. All right, so I have one for Andrew. How can we determine the crash rates for our apps?
So, well, for one thing, you would need to include our SDK. It's really just the number of app loads, the number of crashes divided by the number of app loads. Or the percentage of time essentially that your app is failing. But the important thing is to not just have that number, but to be able to compare it both globally but within your industry to see how well you're doing.
Great. We have a second question. This one's addressed to Justin at Mixpanel. Justin, what A/B tests do you counsel your app customers to run? Which ones are most important in an app?
So it all depends on the point of friction. I think the most important thing that A/B testing can get you to is through these points of friction. Often that's where people drop out and you lose users. But I would say if you're running an app, one of the great things about an app versus traditional websites of years past is if previously they were everything was so transactional, and it was you landed on a page, you took this action, or you didn't take it, and success was binary. If you got an app, you're trying to grow your app, you're trying to grow your user base, I actually think some of the best A/B tests, the ones that I think are the most interesting and the most meaningful, are the ones where people test onboarding education of how the app works and everything, and then their success metric isn't something like, bought an item or like this transactional kind of success, it's retention. And so okay, if we give this person this onboarding and explain to them our product this way, and we give this other person this other onboarding experience and give and explain how the product works in this other way, what does a better job of explaining the value of the product so that people come back in 7 days, 2 weeks, 30 days later? So I think some of the most meaningful ones are less transactional and more around retention.
Great. Well, thanks to everybody. Those are the questions that we had, and thanks to everyone who signed up and attended. We really hope this was useful for you and that you've now had your minds blown by all the conventional wisdom that's now been debunked successfully. So please check out each company at our websites where we have lots of material available in our resources sections and things to, interesting things to look at. And this webinar has also been recorded and it'll be made available to view again within the next couple of days. Thanks again for everybody for attending, and thanks to our presenters.